Let's watch Why Communism Will Never Work real quick. Sorry, I need to speed up this video. I didn't speed up the last one. That was a mistake. I should have sped it up times 100 so I didn't actually have to watch it.
Because one thing that struck me as a layman reading the Communist Manifesto was, okay, so you've got the proletariat who are much more numerous.
Stop sending me videos of people who have only read the manifesto. What is this? Well, I mean, at least they're honest about it, but come on, people. Like, if you're studying Marx, you should at least know that Marx wrote way more than the manifesto, right? And you should at least be humble. Like, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I've only read this 30-page party program that Marx created for the Communist Party in the 1800s. I haven't read the, 3,000 plus pages of Capital where he actually lays out his theories. No, it's like, one of the things I learned reading the manifesto was that Marx was really stupid and evil, and he just, wanted the workers to eat puppies and kill people for no reason. So I'm a pretty smart intellectual after reading that 30-page pamphlet. Come on. There's no intellectual rigor in the U.S. There's so many academic and intellectual frauds running around, acting like they're well-read or acting like they, rigorously study the things that they talk about. And it's never the case. It's just intellectual laziness everywhere.
Numerous than the bourgeoisie. We are going to take the private property of the bourgeoisie and somehow inherit it for a time. But if there's a lot more of the proletariat than the bourgeoisie, you're not all fitting into their private property. So who's kind of agreeing to live in the nice places?
Oh my gosh, this is like when Sacha Baron Cohen tried to prank Bernie Sanders, and he was like, why don't we just take the 99% and move them into the 1%? And Bernie's like, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because they're statistics. So if you can't take 99% and move them into the 1%. It would just create a different 1%. He's like, yeah, but so the majority of people are the 99%. What if we took them and put them in the 1%? And Bernie's trying to explain to him how that's not what socialism is. Here's this academic, this white podcaster guy making that Sacha Baron Cohen prank argument, but he's serious about it.
While the others choose not to.
Right.
And the point is, the practical application isn't there. And
especially
tearing
today.
down something, yeah, that's attractive. Let's blow this thing up. Yeah.
In fact,
then how do you build it?
So using these definitions, I would say in America today, there's more bourgeoisie than proletariat, especially if you're defining bourgeoisie as
What? I was trying to pause it before he said that, and then I hear that there's more proletariat than bourgeoisie in America today. There are more Vanguard and BlackRock investors than there are people who sell their labor to survive every day. No, dude, my mind is so blown. I forgot what they said before that. What did they say before that? Oh, the practical application. That's right. So I'm reading volume 2 right now. Right, and in volume 1, Marx lays the basis for his critique and his critique of capitalist production. But volume 2, he starts to talk about circulation, the circulation of capital, and how money works, how the banks work. And it starts to get really, really, really complex. And what you realize he's doing is he's laying out the science needed for economic calculation, for economic planning, right? For planning a system of production that isn't market production, right? For creating a planned system where the people can decide how goods and services are produced themselves. He's creating the mathematical equations and the calculations that you would need to plan something out like this, or to even reproduce a capitalist economy. He's also giving mathematical equations to understand circulation in the current capitalist economy, so we can know how to transition out of this to a socialist system. So while Marx didn't, predict the future a lot, he analyzed the capitalist system around him and said, it's the job of the working masses to seize power from the capitalists and then, create their society. I'm not going to predict exactly how that's going to happen. I'm not going to explain how it's going to happen step by step, because that's the work of history and we can never perfectly predict reality, right? While he did that, he also left the workers tools for planning a system of production, for planning an economy, right? He created the scientific basis for building socialism if you get into Capitals Volume 2 and 3. But these guys who are going to pretend they're experts on Marxism now have only read the manifesto, the 30-page manifesto. So how do they know this? They don't. They don't know what they're talking about, but they're still going to open their fat mouths, spew a bunch of nonsense, and then upload it to YouTube for the whole public to see. Right? If you read Volume 2, you would know that it's not all theoretical, that Marx did lay the basis for socialist calculation, and you're lying to people. You are intellectual frauds.
As like the owning class that these people are doing.
Yeah.
I mean, far more people in America are owners than private property owners.
Yeah. Neil is my proletariat.
Yeah, right. He's
I'm gonna jump out my window again. I own a microphone. I own, I don't own my house. I rent my house, but I have this house. I'm a capitalist too. I'm the bourgeoisie. I own private property. Like, what do you think people back in Marx's day just lived like on the street? They all just sat around waiting to go work for the capitalist class? Of course, people own some kind of property. What people don't do is make their entire living by paying others to work on the property that they own. Right? That's the bourgeoisie. And yes, America does have more petty bourgeoisie. They have more middle class, small business owners than a lot of countries. And there's a big petty bourgeoisie culture. But the petty bourgeoisie needs workers to work for them too. Right? So there's always going to be more workers than there are going to be capitalists. It just doesn't because the capitalists need the wages or the labor of workers to make money at all. Without labor, they make no money. So you can never have all capitalists. There will be nobody to work the land that the capitalists own. How could you say this and not have that occur to you? How could that not occur to you? If you say the majority of Americans are bourgeoisie, well, then who's working the land? Right? Or do you even know how Marx defines private property? Or do you just think private property is like your toothbrush and communism is when the state comes and takes your toothbrush?
Your wage slave,
unless he hires somebody.
But Neil owns stuff.
Damn it,
right?
Neil.
And as soon as he
couldn't do that.
As soon as he becomes a homeowner, is he a bad guy? Is he part of the owning class?
Yeah, they would be. I suppose. Certainly, if he was to rent anything.
Yeah, they would be. That's a great point. No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. Just look up how Marx defines private property. Like, yes, you would be because you own this podcast. This podcast is your capital. The microphone and the camera and the things you use are the means of production, right? And you put your own labor into that. So maybe you could be petty bourgeoisie, small business owner, whatever. If your podcast is successful, you're making probably a small amount of surplus. And yes, the cameraman is your worker. The people who work on set are your workers. Their labor is being used to make profit for you. And you're paying them a fraction of what their labor creates through wages. But then they say the cameraman himself owns stuff or could become a homeowner and then he's part of the bourgeoisie too. No. First of all, the person who owns the podcast, that's really irrelevant, right? You can have your podcast. You're still not like Vanguard or BlackRock or the Goldman and Sachs or these banks who own the vast majority of the economy and produce the means of subsistence, produce everything we need to survive and hoard those things so that if we want them, we have to sell our labor to them, right? You're just running a podcast. So you own a tiny little amount of capital that creates probably some extra income for you unless it's really successful. So that's not what Marx was talking about. And he acknowledges that the petty bourgeoisie, the small business owners can ally with the workers against the capitalists. This is something that Marxists have discussed throughout history. It's in the CPUSA's party platform on like the second page. So that's different than the bourgeoisie proper. That's why Marx creates this word called petty bourgeoisie, small bourgeoisie, petite bourgeoisie, to describe a different class of people, different from the capitalist manufacturers and banks. But then your cameraman, it's an even more ridiculous argument to say your cameraman's bourgeoisie if he buys a house or if he owns stuff. Private property is land that you own that you pay others to work, right? It's the means of production that you own, the raw materials that you buy to have your workers work on so you can eventually sell it and make a surplus, make millions of dollars in profit, the way that Vanguard and BlackRock and the actual bourgeoisie who dominate capitalist society in the U.S., the way that they do it, right? Buying a house, you're not making any money from a house. You live in the house, you use it, right? The house doesn't make you any money. Private property is stuff that you buy, combine it with labor, and then the products of it you sell, and you make more money, right? You don't make money from a glass of water, or you don't make any money. I guess you don't make any money from a cup. You don't make any money from a book. These are personal property. Jesus. And these people call themselves, like this guy goes around calling himself a doctor, and that gives you some kind of authority to speak on things in our society. Dude, you don't know more than a toddler.
Right. So in America today, the bourgeoisie, so defined in these crazy categories, might be a lot bigger than the proletariat. There's not that many people even that are working in the steel. I drove across the bridge the Allegheny coming here today, right? Those old steel mills, they're shut down now.
Yeah.
A lot of them are working at home on their computers and their laptops in homes that they own.
Here's the
thanks to capitalism.
Here's the final line from the.
Yes, and they're still selling their labor. They're still selling their labor. And that's what you call the decay of imperialism. That phenomena you've noticed where the banks and the capitalists have outsourced a lot of our good manufacturing jobs. And, in a lot of those places have replaced the manufacturing jobs with opioids, which has led to horrible crises of addiction in a lot of communities that used to be based around manufacturing. That is called the decay of imperialism because capitalists realize they can outsource their outsource production to sweatshops, pay less for their labor, and make more money. So that leaves people here in the US to do Uber Eats or work at Starbucks or work from home, which apparently this guy is against and doesn't realize that people who work from home are still selling their time and energy and their activity, their life activity, which is their labor. And I mean, if you strictly define the proletariat as industrial workers, you can do that, sure, but it's still the working masses, though. Right? You could say maybe the proletariat strictly in that strictly defined sense has shrunk, but the vast majority of Americans are still part of the working mass. The vast majority of Americans still don't own capital. There's still a tiny, tiny percentage of Americans who belong to Vanguard and BlackRock investment groups who own like 50% of the country's wealth. Right? And that's what we're against. That's what Marx was against. But they take these, they look at the decay of capitalist imperialism, which is something Marxists predicted in 1917. They look at it happening modern day in a capitalist imperialist nation. They're like, well, Marxism's been proven incorrect. No, you dumb. Marx predicted this. And if you actually read the stuff you talked about, you would know that. It's just so frustrating because, I spend so much time I'm done with that video. So thank you for sending it. But I spend so much time trying to understand this stuff and wrap my head around this stuff. Not just the simple stuff either, right? Like the complex stuff about socialist economic planning and try and understand these calculations that Marx is using to describe circulation and describe capitalist production and how value is circulated within a capitalist system. And I expect to be able to use that information in a debate, or I expect to be able to bring that information up when I'm discussing this stuff. But then the academics in our society are saying stuff like, well, there's no such thing as the proletariat anymore. Everybody's bourgeoisie because they all own houses or because they all own a toothbrush. Like people in Marx's day had houses too. The proletariat in Marx's day had personal property too that they buy with their wages, and Marx discusses this in depth. But you're too big of an intellectual fraud to actually read it. You just dismiss Marxism as bad and evil because you can right now in our culture, although that is changing. And it allows you to be an intellectual fraud. It allows you to talk about things that you haven't studied or haven't understood. Right? It's just pure freaking laziness. And I say that, from the perspective of somebody who does take the time to understand this stuff, from somebody who has been in academia for a while. Who actually tries to get a grasp on the things that I'm talking about, so I'm not lying to you all when I'm on here on these streams. But then there are these podcasters, these guys flaunting the fact that they have a PhD, that they're a doctor, running their mouth about things they don't understand, and it's just pure freaking laziness, and I can't stand it. Sit down, shut up, and read a book, and then talk about what you learned. don't read the 30-page Communist Manifesto and act like you're the expert. No more proletarians. They all bought stonks. Yeah, I mean, that's a better argument than saying people own a house or people own personal property. Someone owns a toothbrush, so therefore they're part of the bourgeoisie, right? You could make the argument that because people can invest in stocks, that, you know, that makes them part of the bourgeoisie. It does, you know, make it less in their interest to overthrow the system. But, you know, people investing in a 401k, people having a few stocks that hopefully create a retirement fund for them, which is becoming more and more and more difficult to do because wealth and stocks and control. Stocks basically represent control of the means of production. That's being concentrated more and more at the top into the hands of Vanguard and BlackRock and these other investment groups. But still, even if you do own some stocks that are part of your 401k or part of your retirement plan, you still don't have an infinitesimal fraction of what those investment groups have. You have a 1/1,000,000th of what Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and the actual bourgeoisie owns in stock, right? You have an insignificant amount to where if you're a working person, it's still, you know, more than worth it for you, or you should still want to overthrow the ruling class, right? You don't get to control politics. You don't control the media. You don't control the legal system because you're invested in a few stocks, right? You don't become the economic ruling class because you own a tiny infinitesimal fraction of the means of production through stocks. Yeah. But I mean, even that's a better argument than what Dr. What's his name was